Wishing you all an excellent closing of this Congress week. Allow me to begin by expressing my sincerest gratitude as a research professor at the Faculty of Law and International Relations. First of all, to the authorities of the Anáhuac Mayab University for the trust they have placed in me to represent our institution in this important international academic forum. I would also like to extend my appreciation to the organizers of the 5th International Congress, Land and Human Rights, whose focus on this occasion is achieving sustainable food systems through improved financing, more imaginative public policies, and a more effective human rights approach. Thank you very much for the generous invitation and for creating a plural space in which we can rigorously reflect on the legal, economic, social challenges of our times. On this occasion, I will present the paper entitled Diplomacy and Global Risk, Structural Limits of Contemporary International Cooperation, which will be part of the symposium, The Role of Diplomacy in the Face of Global Challenges. In the contemporary context, global risks have fundamentally transformed the nature of international problems, exceeded the traditional capacities of the states, and exposed the limitations of classical mechanisms of cooperation. Phenomena such as climate change, food insecurity, water crisis, and disruption in global supply chains demonstrate the current challenges that are not only transnational but structurally independent. In this scenario, diplomacy is no longer confined to interested negotiations. Rather, it operates as a complex space of interaction among multiple actors, levels of governance, and also normative frameworks. However, this functional expansion has not translated into a corresponding increase in its capacity to effectively respond to global risks. This paper aims to analyze the structural limits of contemporary diplomacy in the face of global risks and to explore its potential reconfiguration within the framework of international cooperation. Specifically, it examines the transformation of diplomacy under conditions of complex interdependence, analyzes the persistent tensions between the state, sovereignty, and international cooperation, and also identifies the structural constraints that hinder the development of effective responses to global challenges. The central argument advanced here is that the shortcomings of diplomacy are not merely operational but rooted in structural contradictions embedded within the international system. Methodologically, the study adopts a qualitative document-based approach grounded in a critical review of specialized literature in international relations and global governance. A hermeneutic perspective is employed to interpret the evolution of diplomacy in relation to the transformation of global challenges, incorporating insights from the theory of complex interdependence and debates on international cooperation and global regimes. This approach enables a shift beyond descriptive analysis and situates diplomacy within the broader configuration of power relations that condition its effectiveness. The expected findings suggest that the contemporary diplomacy is shaped by a structural tension between its traditional state-centered configuration and the demands of an increasingly interdependence and uncertain global environment. Although more flexible forms of diplomatic practice, such as environmental and multi-actor diplomacy, have emerged, they have not replaced traditional frameworks, but rather coexist with them, generating fragmentation and weakening coordination capacities. Furthermore, the predominance of soft law mechanisms and the absence of robust binding instruments significantly reduce the effectiveness of international cooperation, particularly in contexts where strategic state interests are at stake. In this sense, diplomacy functions less as an effective mechanism for managing global risks and more as a space for negotiation competing interests. The discussion challenges the assumption that the expansion of actors and agendas in diplomacy necessarily leads to improved global governance. On the contrary, it argues that such diversification may deepen power asymmetries and complicate consensus building processes. Moreover, contemporary diplomacy is understood as an operating within an unresolved tension between the defense of national interests and the imperative of global cooperation, a condition that ultimately constrains its capacity to address structural risks. This tension is not incidental but constitutive of the international system itself. The paper concludes that contemporary diplomacy exhibits not only operational limitations but also a deeper structural insufficiency in responding to the complexity of global risks. Consequently, reconfiguration, its reconfiguration cannot be reduced to technical adjustments, but requires a more profound reconsideration of its foundational principles oriented toward fostering forms of international cooperation that are more coherent, effective, and aligned with the interdependent nature of contemporary global challenges. Ultimately, the crisis of contemporary diplomacy is not merely a failure of instruments, but a reflection of deeper structural contradictions within the international system itself. In a world defined by complex interdependence, diplomacy continues to operate within frameworks designed for a fragmented reality that no longer exists. As a result, global risks expand faster than our capacity to collectively respond to them. If diplomacy is to remain relevant, it must move beyond negotiation as a mere defense of national interests and evolve into a genuine mechanism for managing shared vulnerabilities. As Kofi Annan once stated, we live in an interdependent world, and our problems have no passport. The question then is not whether cooperation is desirable, but whether we are willing to transform diplomacy to make it truly possible. As a result of this research, we will present next year a book chapter with Dickinson, so do not miss the extended version of this analysis in the scientific output derived from our Land and Human Rights Conference 2026.